Now, remember, you can go to spectator.co.uk/cheers to get our Christmas offer. 12 weeks of the Spectator for just £12, a free bottle of Port Roger champagne, the champagne of Winston Churchill. Terms and conditions apply. Now, in November, the Spectator published a pro-Scottish independence article. It was the first in a long time by Andrew Wilson, former member of the Scottish Parliament with the SNP. He chairs the Sustainable Growth Commission, the SGC, is an SNP-funded research unit to look into the economics of an independent Scotland. Andrew Wilson, welcome to the programme here on Spectator TV. Let me start. Is it still SNP policy to continue using the pound sterling outside of the UK monetary union for an unspecified period after independence?
Thank you for having me on, Andrew. It's much appreciated. I'm sorry I'm not wearing as convivial a jumper. I will do next time. Yes, it is. So that the idea there is to be honest about the transition that will be needed to move towards independence, learning all of the lessons from Brexit, really, which is to state we know that in doing so, we wouldn't have sovereignty over monetary policy. The Bank of England's independent anyway, but that is a price worth paying because it mitigates the risks that would come from moving too quickly to a new currency, and that's the reason for it. So it's to have a managed and balanced, orderly transition. Obviously, you don't have monetary policy control, but we don't at present, so it's neutral to what's happening at the moment, and what happens the day before independence will happen the day after it, and you focus on everything else, getting the government set up, creating a central bank, crucially appointing someone who is credible in the view of the world markets to lead the central bank. All of these things are the priority.
But given that you accept that you would not have an independent monetary policy in this transition period, particularly as defined by the European Union, in that period, you could not join the European Union.
Well, a key is, well, what's certainly true is that it's a unique situation. No one has gone out and gone back in. No one has joined in these terms, in this way. Scotland's been a member as part of the United Kingdom for 45 or more years. What the acquis says on the matter of currency or monetary policy is simply that member states should treat their exchange rates as a matter of common concern. What that really means, of course, is that you don't use your exchange rate to unfairly compete within the single market, and we wouldn't be doing that. Whether or not we're allowed to join in advance of having our own currency will really be a matter for the European Union.
That's highly unlikely, isn't it, Andrew Wilson? I mean, it is highly unlikely that the European Union would allow you to join, as opposed to discuss joining, even maybe do some negotiations, go through the principles involved, but to allow you to join when you have the currency of a nation whose explicit policies to diverge from the EU. I mean, I think we can both agree that ain't going to happen.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I think there is incentive for the EU to have Scotland back as a member state. We would like to join. The whole point of having this argument at the moment is because we're out the EU against our expressed wishes. I think we can, but it will take time. I mean, it will take a couple of years.
Hold on, Andrew. Are you saying that you could join the EU?
Yes.
With sterling?
Yes, I believe that we can, but this will be a matter not for me, not even for the Scottish Government. It'll be a matter for the EU to decide.
But what possible evidence do you have for that? You're using the currency of a country that isn't even in the EU. The EU has its own currency, but you don't want to use that. You would not have an independent central bank as defined by the EU and what it demands. You wouldn't have an independent monetary policy. You wouldn't be setting your own interest rates. I mean, it's inconceivable that you could join with sterling.
Well, I don't think any of those things are inconceivable in terms of membership. We would have our own central bank. It would be independent, but it wouldn't be setting interest rates, or it wouldn't be ordering the exchange rate.
And it wouldn't have the power to print money, and it wouldn't be a lender of last resort because you're not printing money. And all of these are conditions for joining the EU, not just the Eurozone. They're conditions for being in the EU.
Well, none of those things are actually set out in the acquis as stands, but we would be a lender of last resort. So the central bank and its regulator would be a lender of last resort to the domestic Scottish banks. So that would be the case. We would have a central bank in much the way as the Euro member states have their own central banks at present. It wouldn't have all the functions of the Bank of England, but this is the orderly way to do it. What the EU wouldn't want is for Scotland to be joining the EU, going through a disorderly process of independence from the United Kingdom. I think they would be much more interested in Scotland having an economy which was stable, which was growing, and that the institutions were being set up in an orderly manner. So that's the plan that we have recommended to the Scottish Government.
Point to anything, either in the acquis or in European law or in statements by senior European figures, that would indicate that you could join the EU with sterling as your currency?
Well, there's no precedent, Andrew. That much is true.
But could you point to anybody that said they would do something unprecedented?
But we're coming out of the United Kingdom. Ireland did this the same way. It kept the United Kingdom currency for a period of 6 years, albeit a completely different era. And then
the rules for then it was the European Economic
it was way before
the rules
that.
Are entirely different.
All I'm saying is that the precedent for doing this was set by Ireland long ago. There is no precedent for this going into the European Union. Of course there isn't. But Scotland is already fully compliant with almost all of the requirements to be an EU member state. We would need to set up some institutions, chiefly a central bank. I think we would be a great counterparty and an excellent EU citizen state. So I do believe.
But you may think all that, but the EU has to agree that.
Indeed.
And I can find no indication. I mean, I look at even the rules that they give for a country like Montenegro or others coming in. They've got to have independent central banks, ability to print money, set their own interest rates, all the rest of it. You will have none of that. These are important powers that will stay with the Bank of England in this period.
Yeah, and I think it's the orderly way to do it. Now, whether or not the European Union accepts Scotland as a member remains to be seen. I believe they will. That certainly is going to be our intent as a country, or at least I hope it will. And I think this is the best. The alternative is less orderly, and it would probably delay Scotland's accession because it would take longer for Scotland to properly create the institutions and the stability that we need.
I'm not clear in any sense in which you would be independent in this period. Your monetary policy would be set by the Bank of England, and your currency would be set by Brussels because, as you say, acquis, the Chapter 17 of the acquis says that exchange rates are a matter of common concern. So you'd have to run your exchange rate in line with the European Union. But here's the problem. You don't control the exchange rate. It's sterling. So there's none of these areas do you meet any of the criteria.
Well, as I say, we will only be able to apply when we are formally independent. And that will take time itself, and after a vote, maybe a couple of years, and then we can apply, and then we will see what the European Union actually thinks. This is the orderly way to go about it. Of course, it's not full independence, but then no countries in the world other than North Korea are fully independent. Independence is about interdependence and sharing sovereignty, and that's the idea of the European Union, Andrew, as you will appreciate and know.
Now, the policy, as I understand it, is this would be a transition stage to a Scottish currency.
Yeah.
How long would this transition be?
Well, that depends. We've set out recommendations for a number of tests that would then determine how quick it would happen. We estimated at that point between 5 and 10 years. Key tests include financial stability, the ability to get your deficit into an orderly place in line with the Stability Pact. That will take time. But between 5 or 10 years, it could become much quicker.
It could be 10 years before. It could be 10 years.
It could be 10. It could be 5
before you're in a position to join the European Union.
Well, as I say, I disagree that it's a block to joining, and we will see that's a matter for the EU, but it could indeed take time. I mean, it's 4 years since we voted for Brexit at the United Kingdom level, and we still don't know what the arrangements are. I think it's important, to be honest, to set out what the transition will look like, what the trade-offs are, because nothing's free and easy. This will not be a simple thing to do. The underlying message, Andrew, is that it will be worth it, but it would begin a task of reform that would take a generation to get to the levels of performance we want. The whole point is to get to be as well performing as countries like Denmark, if we can, over the course of a generation. But we mustn't go a populist route. We mustn't take the approach of Brexit with no plan, no transition, no honesty. We have to be clear. And I do. Well,
see. Let's come on to whether it's worth it in a minute. But just look at the time scale here, because it could take X years. We know what X is. Well, you still have sterling before you get to your Scottish currency. It could then take Y years for that new currency to establish itself, a Scottish central bank, to satisfy the EU's requirements. So X and Y together could be more than 10 years. It could be a lot more. Indeed, it could not be for the foreseeable future. That's the reality.
Well, we'll see. I mean, this can be exercised in the campaign should the referendum happen. I don't agree. I think it will happen much more quickly. I mean, East Germany was able to join in months when it unified with West Germany. It's possible that these things can be done. Scotland is already a sophisticated democracy with a well-advanced economy who would be a good member
Yeah.
state and counterpart.
East
So
Germany joined because it immediately took the euro. You're not prepared to do that.
well, they joined with Germany. I'm trying to remember the timing. I don't think that,
No. What I mean is they didn't immediately take the euro. What they immediately took the Deutschmark as their currency, which then transmuted into the euro. You're not proposing that.
No, we're not. I mean, this proposal is, in our view, the most orderly way to achieve stability, and is the right one.
It's not just the currency that's a roadblock to you joining the EU. You need to meet the EU's Stability Pact conditions, and that includes deficits, budget deficits, below 3% of GDP. Now, even before COVID struck, Scotland's deficit was almost 9% of GDP. So it would, unless you want to slash public spending immediately, it would take you years to get to the Stability Pact's conditions.
Well, again, we'll see what the starting point looks like when we get to it, because the fiscal position at the moment is obviously unusual. The Stability Pact is suspended. Now, what's interesting is you don't have to achieve the Stability Pact to join. I mean, the precedent there, Croatia, Poland, Hungary were all not performing to Stability Pact deficit levels when they joined, indeed continue to not do for some time. But what definitely needs to happen is that you have set up your financial governance such that you're on a glide path to achieve it. Now, interestingly, at this moment, Andrew, if you look at the IMF statements in their fiscal report in the autumn, they were arguing that countries, focusing on Britain, shouldn't be belt tightening too quickly and as we come out of the crisis. The need is to keep money flowing into the economy, both for life support, but also for stimulus and then for reform. So the priority for the coming 5 years or could be more must be to invest. And so I don't think normal fiscal arrangements apply. But what's also true just now, what COVID proves, is that deficits of the level you've just stated can be funded at historically low levels of interest. I mean, Croatia got a bond away the other week at 0.9% interest. Now, if Croatia can get a bond away at that level, so could Scotland. Obviously, there will be risk premiums to manage down, but I do believe that it's fundable. But you're right, we do need to get the financial arrangements in order.
But your own Growth Commission said it could take up to 10 years to meet the Stability Pact's conditions.
Absolutely, but remember that was pre the market conditions that we have at the moment, and obviously pre-COVID.
Yeah, but there will be a return to prudence, Andrew Wilson, at some stage. That is EU policy. Of course, we're going through an unusual time, but the Stability Pact will come back in by the time you are ready to negotiate this, and you will have to meet its conditions.
And we do, and as you're right in saying, we set that out. What I'm saying, the one point of disagreement with you is that you need to get over the Stability Pact to get in. I think the precedent's there that you don't, but you do need to be getting towards it in an orderly fashion over time. I think the key way to get deficits down around the world is by focusing on growth. I think austerity or cutting spending or indeed increasing tax at this moment in these times would be counterproductive and wouldn't achieve what they set out.
But your commission said you had to get public spending down as a percentage of GDP.
That was the method we set out, which because we decided in the report
well, that's a reduction in overall spending as a percentage of the economy.
But not in cash terms. But what we were saying at that point, Andrew, was to demonstrate a conservative and prudent approach. We didn't decide to model and just assume that growth was going at above trend and therefore everything would be easy, because we were demonstrating that you could do this without getting growth up. What I'm saying to you now, I think that the lesson for the coming 5 years is the priority for government intervention on fiscal policy must be to stimulate growth and investment so that we can both get out of the pandemic crisis, but through the reform era that comes next, deal with climate change, deal with the great harms that are happening at the moment, not least inequality. And back to the core point, why do we want to do this? Because the United Kingdom's economic performance has not served anyone over a very long period, but now more than before, it's twice as bad performance as the average for the industrialized world this year on the measures of the OECD. So the United Kingdom is both not performing economically, but also has one of the worst inequality records in Europe as well.
Well, you are assuming some pretty reasonable growth figures to try and get your budget deficit down. I mean, you're assuming average growth higher than it's been in Scotland in the past decade. You also make some pretty heroic spending assumptions. But on the growth, I want to ask you this. I mean, you think you're on the record as saying Brexit's a serious setback to British economic growth because of all the trade friction it will introduce even with a deal. But in your own projections, you don't allow for the same serious setbacks of trade friction for an independent Scotland.
Well, I think the point here is that getting back into the European Union would be pro-growth, back into the single market and customs union would be good for growth. Setting up the institutions of government in Scotland, which we currently pay to have in London, would be pro-growth. So these are all reasons to be optimistic.
But only 20% of your exports go to the EU, 60% go to the rest of the UK. That's where, first of all, you will still be out of the EU for quite a while, so you'll still have trade friction there. And then if you get independence, you'll have even more trade friction with the market to which you sell 60% of your exports.
If you're right, though, earlier in the interview, you were saying we wouldn't get into the EU for a period of time, and so there would be no change to the trading arrangements, either with Europe or indeed with the UK. We will see what the friction looks like with the border to our east and to our west that is being imposed, we think, by January, and we'll see what the situation is there. That is a trade-off. You are correct to identify that that is a trade-off. We have to judge as a country whether it's worth it. I believe that all the evidence is, you can look to Ireland as a great example of countries who join the European Union, small countries who are able to succeed on a bigger stage, and we can cooperate in that way and grow faster. If you say that all our eggs have to be in the basket of trading just with the rest of the UK, which is
I'm not saying that, but I'm putting this to you because I don't understand the answer. About 45% of UK exports go to the EU, and you think Brexit a disaster for what that will do because of trade friction. But 60% of Scottish exports go to the rest of the UK. By definition, that's potentially an even bigger disaster. It must be.
Sorry, I did try to answer that. I mean, the point is that to begin with, for a period until we join the European Union, there will be no change to the arrangements on trade. When we join the European Union, then whatever the arrangements that are agreed between the United Kingdom and Europe will be what the arrangement is between Scotland and the United Kingdom. We don't know yet, and we remain. That's why we didn't in our report include it, because even now, 4 years on, we still don't know what the arrangements exactly will be. I don't believe it will be the sort of transition that you're talking about. I mean, if you even just pick another area, Canada has 85% of its exports going into the United States. They have an arrangement, they are independent. You don't have to be part of the same country to trade with it, obviously.
No, I understand, but it's also a reasonably friction-free border as well. But you could then be in a choice where you may get a benefit of less trade friction with the EU, but by far your biggest market, and it still will be by then, you're going to increase the trade friction. That would be an incentive not to join the EU, but stay in the UK.
Well, again, as I say, we will know what that will look like when we see what the border is, and we will see what the level of friction is.
And if the level of friction is severe, are you seriously saying that you might then not decide to join the EU, but stay in some kind of economic union with the UK?
Well, I would hope not to have any friction in any direction. That would be in the interests of all parties.
Yeah, but that's not going to happen, you know that.
The United Kingdom seems determined on a different course at present, but we will see. So we will vote. When we come to a vote, we'll know this trade-off will be clear, because it'll be living and breathing on the border to our east and to our west, so we'll be able to see it.
You're going to be in a situation where you're going to have the currency of another country, so you will have very limited monetary policy. You will be trying to get towards the EU rules, which mean a huge squeeze on public spending. Your party has ruled out major tax rises because you've frightened all the caravans head south. Whichever way you cut it, on fiscal, monetary policy, tax policy, the first 10 years of an independent Scotland are going to be a decade of austerity.
Well, absolutely not. I mean, I think that would be entirely counterproductive and the wrong strategy to take. If Scotland doesn't choose independence, then we will have fiscal policy set by governments we don't vote for. And the record of the Conservatives in the last 10 years has been one of austerity, which has led to outcomes which are bad for Scotland and indeed for the regions and nations of the rest of the UK. The whole point of independence is to say, would we be more likely or less likely to choose policies that suit Scotland if we had a government that we voted for every time. Now, this is a core economic and democratic point. Now, it's true, Andrew, you might say that you think that Scotland would get it wrong. The evidence of history is that...
I'm not saying get it wrong. I'm looking at the position in which it would find itself, even if you've got a new currency. It'll take a long while to establish the bona fides of that new currency. The currency markets will be tough on you. The bond markets will not be keen to lend very much, and if they do, it'll be a premium because you're a new kid on the block of the currency. Brussels will say, you've got to get your fiscal deficit down. You've got to cut spending here. You've got to get that budget deficit much closer to 3%. You've got to align your currency with the euro. It's all in Acquis 7, Chapter 17 of the Acquis. They, the markets, Brussels, London, they will force all sorts of things on you. You will have very little room for manoeuvre. Independence would be a chimera.
Well, but we've got no room for manoeuvre at present, so it will be a transition from constraints where we are just now with limited devolution to independence as part of the European Union. You're right to say that there are trade-offs. You're right to say that there will be challenges to be overcome. And we will have to see these set out clearly in a transition plan. We never got one for Brexit.
I mean, you say you haven't got room for manoeuvre, but at the moment you are able to take in per capita a little lower than the British average when it comes to tax revenue, and you get a massively more than the British average when it comes to spending. Your deficit is financed by the union at the moment.
Well,
let's move to a situation where you have to finance your own deficit.
Well, if we pause on that for a minute, I mean, the money that's raised in Scotland in taxation pays for the equivalent of the entire Scottish government budget, plus all of welfare, plus all of pensions. The deficit to which you refer is really made up of UK programmes, UK debt interest, defence and other spending areas, which isn't...
And you would have to pay for defence. You've committed to joining NATO, that's 2% of GDP, and you would have to pay a share of British debt interest. You still have to pay that if you're independent.
Well, absolutely. The point I'm trying to...
So I don't understand your point.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that it's not money coming over the border to boost the Scottish economy. This is money that's not spent, but as allocated against Scotland. We set out in that report how we address it and how we deal with it. I do agree that we should pay a portion of UK debt interest, and we set out again in the report that we would pay an annual solidarity payment from Scotland to the rest of the UK, because what's interesting, if you look at the balance sheet of the United Kingdom government, there are many more liabilities than assets on it, about 4 trillion and growing on the liabilities, 2.5 trillion of assets. So the negotiation between Scotland and the discussion between Scotland and the UK government would be one of what responsibilities does Scotland take, not what benefits.
Right, but what, with this 15 billion deficit, what would you not be spending on that is currently spent now?
Well, the markets at the moment aren't punishing any member state of the European Union in the way that you say that they would Scotland.
No, I didn't ask for the markets. I'm saying, what would you not be spending on that is currently spent now? You've admitted you'd have to contribute to the debt service of the residual UK. You've admitted you still spend money on defence, maybe different from how it's done now, but you still do that. Where would you not spend?
Well, that'll be a matter for the government at the time to choose on the basis of their electoral promises to the people. We have set out in the report that you've clearly read in detail some areas where we would do it differently. Now, defence is one where we would spend less than the United Kingdom does as a share of GDP. There will be others.
But you still have to spend 2% to join NATO.
Well, you know that most of the NATO members don't have 2%. I mean, there are only 3 or 4 of them.
You're the new kid on the block. They'll want you to commit to 2. Well, just as the EU will ask you to commit, at least in principle, to the euro.
What the European Union, what the other international institutions will want to see from Scotland is that it's transitioning in an orderly way, that it's respectful of its responsibilities to the rest of the UK, not least in debt interest, but in other areas, that it takes seriously common defence challenges. All of these things is what Scotland would require to set out.
So I have no idea what you're going to cut to make any kind of inroad into that £15 billion deficit.
So the point, again, we covered it a few minutes ago, the point of the moment is even the IMF are arguing that countries should not be cutting to reduce their deficits for the foreseeable future. The priority should be on investing for growth. And the
IMF is talking about countries with established currencies, with a long track record of borrowing and not defaulting, and with independent central banks and with the ability to print money. None of that applies to an independent Scotland.
I don't understand why you are referring all of the time to the ability to print money, because there is no evidence in economic history that monetary policy or the ability to print money is a route to economic growth and success. It can buy time to stabilize during times of crisis or fluctuations. But if QE and printing money was the route to success, Britain would be the best performing economy and Japan would be the second best. Neither of those are true. In truth, over time, the focus of economic policy should be on growth, productivity, and over time, and being honest about the fact that change and transformation takes a generation. It's not done overnight.
The reason I mentioned printing money is because I see an increasing number of SNP supporters saying that budget problems, there's deficit, all of that could be solved by reference to modern monetary theory, which is the printing of money, basically. Well, do you accept that that's incompatible with EU membership?
100% I accept that. And it's one of the things which is, that just funnily enough, looking at the acquis to which you were referring, and central, you know, the monetary financing of the government by the central bank is not allowed. So MMT is a theory which I think would be a colossal error for any country right now, but certainly for a new country like Scotland on the path.
But some of the rising forces in your party, a chap called Tim Rideout, he's been promoting it. Another chap called Chris Hanlon, he is now your SNP policy convener. They're all pushing this.
Well, people are allowed in political parties to take differing points of view on differing things.
Yeah, they're key to setting policy. Are you not really at the centre of setting policy anymore?
Well, all I've done is produce a report with members of a commission, some of whom are now cabinet secretaries. That is the party policy. Now, people can promote MMT. It is a thing that's alive in the world. Its adherents are almost religious in their zeal. It could be possible, maybe in America, maybe in China. It's not possible for a small country.
Well, the final question to you then, if you are still setting the direction of policy in this for the SNP. Chris Hanlon, as I said, your SNP policy convener now, who is pro-modern monetary theory, the printing of money. He says you should take no share of national debt at all. He even accepts that the financial services industry in Scotland, which is large, will decline. And his comment on that was, "And good riddance to it." Now, is that the serious words of a serious party that is going to have to establish its financial bona fides?
Well, it's not the party's policy or position, Andrew. I mean,
he's the policy convener.
But every political party, you could pick individuals who hold posts at whatever level and find things that don't agree with the party. It's not what's in the report. It won't be what's in the white paper for a referendum. It won't be what a Scottish government does. And of course, the financial services sector is hugely important to Scotland, employing tens of thousands.
So not good riddance to it.
Quite the opposite. We would want to be a home for financial services. And in actual fact, going back into the European Union, the ability for companies and asset management and other areas of finance and pensions and so on, there would be an attraction to being located in Scotland rather than out with the European Union.
Okay. We'll leave it there, Andrew Wilson. We thank you for your time and going through all these complicated issues with you. It's a fascinating discussion, and a very Merry Christmas to you.
And to you.